Hi guys! I'm going to briefly breathe some life back into this channel with a quickie review of Pacific Rim Uprising. I know a lot of people had some concerns about this movie. Not only is it a sequel, and we know that sequels often turn out pretty disappointing, but it's a sequel without Del Toro directing it. So, having seen it this morning at a 3D screening, I thought I would report back some of my opinions about it. Of course, these are all my personal opinions, and if you disagree, that is 100% fine. So, first I wanted to address these concerns that people had and whether I think they're founded or not based on what I saw in the movie itself. Concern number 1. The Jaegers are not weighty. This was the most common concern I saw after the trailers were dropped. A lot of people were saying that what they really liked about the original movie was the mechs, the Jaegers. That they felt heavy, that they had this weight to them, that they seemed truly massive. And a lot of people saw the trailers and thought the Jaegers looked too fast, too lightweight, and that the motion was just too slick for these sizable, monstrous suits. And I think that these fears are unfounded, for the most part. The Jaegers in Uprising, maybe they're a tiny bit faster moving, but it's not really that different. I think the main reason why the Jaegers in the trailers seemed to be lightweight was because you don't get the sound effects in the trailer, because there's trailer music over them. Jaegers aren't real, they're an illusion, they're CG, but a big reason why they feel big and heavy when you watch them is the sound effects. It's the groaning of the metal on the metal, and the echoes that move along the body, and the vibrations of the ground as they step and they walk and they fall. And this is a huge part of what makes the Jaegers seem big. And when you take those sounds out, you're missing out on at least half of that illusion. But when you actually watch the movie, you get all that. So they're not nearly as lightweight as the trailers would make you think. That being said, there are some Jaegers which do have more lightweight motion. There's Scrapper, which is a mini Jaeger, and I think it's about the size of a normal Jaeger's head, so it's way smaller, and correspondingly it also moves a lot faster than your full-sized Jaegers. Then you have the drone Jaegers. I didn't quite get a good comparison of them compared to the regular Jaegers. My best guess is that the drones are like maybe a quarter of the size of the regular ones. So they definitely seemed a lot smaller. And they also seem to be made out of different materials or differently than the classic for the Jaegers. And of course they're drones. So it makes sense that they're going to move a lot differently than the normal Jaegers. Finally, we have Saber Athena. This is a full-size Jaeger, but it has a much, I guess you could say, daintier build. Most of the Jaegers are built for punching and whomping, but Athena mainly wields a sword and is built for slashing and fast movements and can even do like backflips and things. So it's lighter on its feet than the other Jaegers of its size, but it's still not as fast as the smaller drones. A lot of people seem to be concerned that whoever was in charge of overseeing and designing the Jaegers in the new movie didn't care about making them heavy and didn't care about giving them this weightiness and all that, didn't see these Jaegers as special. But I'd say the opposite is true. I think they wanted to have a variety of types of Jaegers and give them different weights and movements based on what makes sense for that type. So I actually see a lot of love and care being and consideration being put into the Jaegers in this movie. Concern number 2, it's too bright. It is very true that the aesthetic is different from the original movie. It doesn't have as much contrast. The original was distinctive for having a lot of black, a lot of night scenes. There were a lot of warm colors like brown and orange. This one has more daylight, outdoor scenes. The colors are cooler, there's more blue and gray. I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, but it might be just they wanted to have some colors that sort of contrasted with our main character, so he doesn't, fade into the background. It does still have a lot of the other colors, like there's a lot of the 3D light displays that are like have like hot pink and all that stuff. So it's not like it's been completely desaturated. And honestly, outside of the outdoor battle scenes, it's not really that bright. Well, it could just be that it seemed darker with 3D glasses, but most of the movie is actually indoor scenes with indoor lighting and, this very sci-fi type of lighting going on. But like I mentioned, most of the big battle scenes are in the daytime. And this was probably so you could clearly see what's happening, which was honestly a reasonable choice, I think, because there are multiple Jaegers in action. In the first movie, it was almost all just Gypsy Danger versus Kaiju. So anytime you saw a piece of a Jaeger, you knew it was Gypsy. You could get away with having nighttime scenes with low visibility because you knew who the players were in the scene. But this time, almost every battle scene has more than one Jaeger. So you have to be able to see them clearly if you want to be able to tell who is who and where. Even in the daylight scenes, like in the dueling scenes between Gypsy and Obsidian Fury, it sometimes got hard to tell which Jaeger was which. And if they'd been fighting at night, honestly, I probably wouldn't have been able to tell who was who. I would not have been able to follow that fight at all if I didn't at least have some daylight so I could, see the shape of the head, because they look very similar. If you're going to be having a movie with multiple Jaegers, it's probably a good call to put it in the daytime. The only Jaeger fight scene that is at night is the one with the drone Jaegers. And since they're all identical anyway, it doesn't matter who is who, and they're designed with a lot of white, so they're visible, so you can get away with having that particular scene happen at night. So if you don't like the fact that there's daylight scenes, then you'll have to direct your complaints to the choice to have multiple Jaegers at play in battle, which I am going to come back to later. Concern number 3, civilians are getting hurt. One of the things a lot of people praised the first movie for was that it went out of its way to reduce civilian casualties. In a lot of disaster movies, there's civilians getting killed and crushed right and left everywhere by the hundreds. In Uprising, there are 2 battles that take place in a city. The first one, though, is a total surprise. So unfortunately, there was no chance to evacuate people, and so assumedly a lot of people are injured and killed in that incident. But by the second city battle, they know it's coming, and they're able to open up the underground shelters, which are still around and still operational, and they are able to get people to safety. So once they actually have the time to warn people to get to shelter, they start doing that. Concern number 4, why are they making kids fight? I did actually see some people take issue with the illogical scenario of sending kids off to fight monsters. Aside from the fact that it's basically a rule in every mech anime ever to have kids controlling your big robots in battle, it does make sense in the context of the story. And it is true, there's a lot of kid characters. There's, I think, 8 teenagers in all. And these teens are actually members of a cadet training corps to train future potential Jaeger pilots. Keyword future. It was not plan A to have them fight at all. And incidentally, I'll just mention, it's very normal to have kids in military training. In the US, I know that Navy cadets start at age 10, so preteens. Also, the in-story logic is that it's easier to get someone used to drifting if they start while they're young, and I think from the production standpoint, they want to get more kids into the theaters. Most of the people who saw the first movie as teens are probably adults by now, and I don't think they want this to be considered an old people movie. Also, with the younger characters, there's a little bit of juvenile joking. There's this running joke about boob touching, so they're clearly trying to appeal to the younger demographic. I don't personally think the joking is too much to annoy older viewers. It's just, a few lighthearted gaffes here and there. So back to the in-universe explanation, these kids were just in a basic training program. There was no expectation that they were going to fight anytime soon because there haven't been any kaiju for 10 years. This is 10 years after the rift closed. There are still Jaegers running around because, the technology didn't just evaporate after the war was over. Some people have their own Jaegers going around doing who knows what. There's a problem with unregistered Jaegers. There's also Jaegers for security purposes and law enforcement. Because the best way to stop a bad guy in a Jaeger is with a good guy in a Jaeger, am I right? Anyway, because things do suddenly go down the pooper, it just happens to be near where the kids are stationed, and so you've got an emergency situation where they don't have time to bring in a lot of older veteran Jaeger pilots. They need to get pilots on the ground immediately, and they'll take the kids because the alternative is that they only send out the 2 adult trainers as pilots, which means they can only send out 1 Jaeger. So they take the next best course of action, which is to send out the kids as well as the adults. Concern number 5. Why would Stacker want his son to be a Jaeger pilot when he didn't want Mako to be one? I remember there's a clip in some of the trailers where Mako is talking to Jake and saying that Stacker always wanted Jake to be a pilot. And some people were like, I thought Stacker didn't want his kids in Jaegers because he was so against Mako being a Jaeger pilot. Does this mean he hated Jake? That he wanted to, condemn him to die in battle or whatever. The thing is, I don't actually remember seeing that scene in the movie. Maybe I just blinked and missed it, or maybe they cut it. I'm not sure. There is mention of Jake having been in cadet training, and then I think he got kicked out for bad behavior, and then his dad was there, but then he left, and I think he died a year after that. So it's implied that Jake was in training, but he was just too young to fight when the kaiju were actually around. And Mako was initially banned from piloting because Stacker felt that she had too much emotional baggage, which would make her chase the rabbit when she was drifting, which is an issue that also comes up in Uprising. So it seems that anyone with traumatic memories who drifts is at risk of getting stuck in that troubling memory, and that can compromise the battle. So that seems to confirm that Mako was banned because of that. And it wasn't just because Stacker was being protective of her. So it doesn't mean Stacker hated his son. As long as his son didn't have any traumatic emotional baggage, he should be fine as a pilot. So moving on from the audience concerns, one of the things I liked better in this movie than the original is the background plot. There were several things I didn't expect, which I enjoyed because I always like to be surprised. I think it worked well following the mythology of the original. I had never really liked the idea of Pacific Rim having a sequel, mainly because I felt like a sequel would probably involve the rift just happening to open again, and that would invalidate all the work our heroes did in the first movie. Fortunately, the plot avoided what I wanted it to avoid, and I appreciated and enjoyed that. Now, that being said, I did pretty strictly avoid spoilers before I watched it, and I didn't try to speculate much about what the plot would probably be because I did want to be able to enjoy it as much as possible the first time I saw it. Maybe if you've already tried to figure out the plot or you've looked up spoilers, then it won't be as big of a deal for you. But if you're saving yourself up for the theater, then I hope you'll be able to enjoy some interesting surprises. Now, for the things I didn't love about the movie. I mean, there's some little things like, the music isn't quite as memorable and such. But the first major issue I have is the ending and the lead up to the ending. I mean, it's going to be hard to top the ending of the original movie. You had Stacker Pentecost nuking himself at the bottom of the ocean. You had Gypsy nuking the rift closed in the alien realm. I mean, that was some pretty high-stakes stuff. And the ending to this one was, comparatively a bit anticlimactic. I mean, I kind of expected that because how do you top an ending like the original? It's going to be hard to do. The movie does have a little bit of emotional throat punching, but that happens earlier on. We don't really get that by the time the ending rolls around. The ending doesn't just have this, these moments of despair just hitting you one after another. It's not that it's unexciting, it's just, comparatively speaking, not as high stakes and thereby not as thrilling. Now, my second major issue with it was that there were too many Jaegers. Now, I'm just as shocked as you might be, but let me explain. In the first movie, they introduce all these different Jaegers. You've got, Gypsy, of course, but then you've also got Cherno Alpha and Crimson Typhoon, and then Striker Rika, but they pretty much all get destroyed right away. I mean, Striker Rika comes back eventually, but they're out of commission. And that disappointed a lot of people because they wanted to see these interesting Jaegers get some action in, other than one or two punches. But Uprising ends up showing us that it was probably a good idea in the end. Now, don't get me wrong, it sounds cool, it sounds awesome to have a bunch of Jaegers going after a couple of different kaiju. But it means that we don't really get to follow the action on any one Jaeger for a stretch of time. Because you have to switch back and forth, and you don't get the long build-ups on any one fighting pair. In the original, you saw Gypsy try one thing on a kaiju, and if that didn't work, she tried something else, and if that didn't work, she tried something else. And when something finally worked, you got a sense of accomplishment. You got a sense of pride, like, yeah, she did it. Ugh. But when you're switching every couple of seconds from one Jaeger to another, you miss out on these long build-ups, which means you also miss out on the satisfying conclusions to those build-ups, and you don't really get those big fist pump moments. In the original, by following these battles with Gypsy Danger, you kind of sort of formed a bond with her. You got fond of her. And there's Gypsy, there were the two pilots, they were this sort of trinity that you got to know. They were the mains, you followed them throughout everything, and it kind of felt special. But now you've got like 4 or 5 different Jaegers, and you're switching between them. And even though there's a main character, Jake, and he's piloting Gypsy Avenger, we don't even really get to bond with her like we did with Gypsy Danger. It's kind of just another suit. Now, if you don't get sentimental over metal robots and you're like, why are you talking about bonding with Jaegers? Then, I'm sure this won't be an issue for you and you can just enjoy the movie without having to worry about this. But that's something that I personally enjoyed from the first movie that I feel is missing here. Though I will say that, I guess, the best alternative in this one is Scrapper. But that one doesn't really show up very much. So, to wrap things up, I think a lot of the things people had concerns over based on the trailers aren't really an issue in the actual movie. Some of the ones that do exist might have an in-story explanation that may work for you, or maybe not, your mileage may vary. This sequel doesn't have as much tension as the original, especially toward the ending. It doesn't really foster any strong bonding between, the viewer and a particular Jaeger the way the original did. But I did really like the plot and the unexpected plot twists. I think those were thought through pretty well. I mean, there was some pretty goofy stuff in the original, like, my Jaeger's analog. And I think some of the in-universe stuff, it makes a little more sense, and it's a little more sensible than we got in the original movie. Ultimately, I think it's still a movie worth watching. You should go into it expecting to see something different than the original. You'll still get to see your massive Jaeger fights, which is, kind of ultimately what this admittedly corny franchise is about. And hopefully you'll still enjoy yourself. Anyway, I hope this review was either helpful or interesting. If you would like to help support me and my channel, I am accepting donations on RitScrib. See the description for how you can do that. And I will, or may, see you next time.